My name is Lucy Patterson. I am 34 years old, and if you had told me a year ago that a simple trip to the grocery store would dismantle my entire reality, I would have laughed. But that is the thing about life-altering betrayals. They don't arrive with a dramatic musical score. They happen in the most mundane places, under the harsh hum of fluorescent lights, while you are deciding which apples to put in your basket. Take a sip of your coffee, get comfortable, and let's talk. Because if you have ever felt like you were constantly auditioning for a part in your own family, a part you never quite seem to land, then you know the exact weight of the silence I am about to describe. Drop a comment below if you've ever had that sudden, gut-wrenching realization that your position in your family was entirely conditional. I was standing in the produce aisle, holding a mesh bag of Honeycrisps, when I ran into my Uncle Victor. Now, Victor has always been the outlier in our family. He's my father's brother, but where my father is loud, rigid, and deeply focused on appearances, Victor is quiet. He is the kind of man who observes everything and says very little, but he has always looked out for me in his own distant way. That afternoon, though, the moment our eyes met, I saw a shift. He didn't smile. Instead, a heavy, profound wave of pity washed over his face, so intense that it made me freeze. Trying to break the sudden tension, I forced a bright, cheerful smile. "Uncle Victor, it's so good to see you," I said, my voice echoing a little too loudly against the plastic bins of lettuce. "I'm so excited for Mark's wedding next month. I finally found the perfect dress. It's this beautiful navy silk, and I can't wait to celebrate with everyone." Uncle Victor didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. He slowly placed a heavy, weathered hand on my shoulder. His fingers tightened just enough to steady me, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet, so desperately gentle. It felt like he was trying to cushion a blow that he knew would break me. "Lucy," he murmured, his eyes searching mine, filled with a deep, sorrowful regret. "The wedding was last week." The world didn't spin. It did something much worse. It stopped completely. Every sound in that grocery store died. The rustle of plastic bags, the steady beep of the cash registers, the low chatter of strangers, all of it vanished, replaced by a loud, roaring static in my ears. I felt a wave of icy cold start at the back of my neck and cascade down my spine, leaving my fingers completely numb. My hands shook so violently that the bag of apples slipped from my fingers, thudding heavily onto the linoleum floor. I didn't even look down to see where they rolled. My mind couldn't process the sentence. The wedding was last week, but I had the date marked on my calendar. I had asked about it. I had bought a dress. Mechanically, my body operating entirely on raw survival instinct, I pulled my phone out of my coat pocket. My breath caught in my chest as my thumb hovered over the screen. I unlocked it, opened social media, and typed in my sister-in-law's name. And there it was. A wall of digital noise. Hundreds of high-resolution photos flooding the feed. The color palette was perfect. There was my mother, glowing in a spectacular blue silk gown, her arm looped tightly through my father's. As he raised a crystal glass of champagne toward the camera, his face split into a wide, triumphant grin. There was my younger brother, Mark, looking immaculate in a tailored black tuxedo, kissing his new bride under an elaborate archway of white roses. Everyone I loved was there, my cousins from Ohio, our old neighbors from the childhood street, Mark's college, even people I barely recognized. They were all laughing, clinking glasses, dancing under strings of warm fairy lights, and celebrating a major family milestone. Everyone except me. They hadn't just forgotten to mail an invitation, which was the pathetic excuse my brain tried to construct in those first few seconds of denial. No, this wasn't an oversight. The sheer scale of the coordination required to keep a 100-person event completely hidden from me meant it was deliberate. They had systematically scrubbed me from the narrative. They had looked at the guest list, looked at my name, and actively decided to erase me from the family history. And the absolute worst part. A month later, when they thought I was still blissfully ignorant, Living my quiet life in the city, they had the unmitigated nerve to reach out and ask for the keys to my private lake house. But before I tell you exactly how I turned their entire world upside down and flipped the script on them, do me a favor, like this video, hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Let's dive into how the quietest people become the most dangerous when they finally have nothing left to lose. To understand how my family could do something so calculated, you have to understand the invisible, toxic architecture of our household. In our family dynamic, I wasn't viewed as a daughter or a sister. I was an asset. I was the reliable one, the eldest. The daughter who moved to the city, climbed the corporate ladder, kept her credit score pristine, and always, without fail, answered the phone when a crisis arose. For 10 long years, I lived under the delusion that my financial stability and my constant willingness to sacrifice my time were my ways of earning my keep. I thought that by being indispensable, I was ensuring I was loved. Have you ever fallen into that trap? Type the word useful in the comments if you've ever realized that people only value you for what you can do for them, rather than who you actually are. My parents and my brother Mark were masterclass manipulators. They weren't cartoon villains who twirled their mustaches and cackled. They were much more dangerous because they were entirely reasonable in their own minds. They had a beautiful, seamless way of rewriting reality so that their selfishness looked like logic. Whenever Mark needed something, it was framed as an investment in his future. Whenever my parents needed a financial cushion, it was framed as a temporary family rough patch. And because I was eager to please, because I desperately wanted my father to look at me with pride just once, I always wrote the check. I remember a specific night, about 4 years ago, and this is one of those parasitic memories that eats at you when the truth finally comes out, where my mother needed an urgent dental procedure that wasn't fully covered by insurance. My father called me, his voice heavy with a performative, fragile stress, claiming they simply didn't have the cash right then and didn't know what they were going to do. I didn't hesitate. I transferred $4,500 from my personal savings account within 10 minutes. 2 weeks later, I visited their house, only to find a brand new, top-of-the-line set of premium golf clubs sitting in the garage. When I asked about it, my father casually remarked that a friend had given him a deal he couldn't pass up. I forced myself to swallow the doubt. I chose to believe them because the alternative, that they were bleeding me dry without a shred of respect, was too painful to face. That brings us to the lake house, the beautiful A-frame cabin perched on a quiet hill overlooking the water. My grandfather had built the core of that house with his own hands. When he passed away a decade ago, the family was in a chaotic financial freefall. My father's credit was completely destroyed from a series of failed business ventures. My mother had never worked a day in her life, and Mark was still floating through college on an extended timeline. They sat me down at the round wooden kitchen table, holding my hands, their faces grave. "Lucy," my father's had said, his voice dripping with an earnest paternal warmth. "You have a good, stable job. If you sign the mortgage papers, we can save Papa's cabin from being sold to strangers. We will handle the rest later. We'll set up a formal family trust so we all share it, but we need your name to lock it down." I was 24 years old. I was young, incredibly naive, and fiercely protective of my family's heritage. I trusted them implicitly. I signed every piece of paper they put in front of me. Over the next 10 years, I became the sole steward of that property. I paid every single monthly mortgage payment. I paid the rising property taxes. I paid the steep insurance premiums. When the roof sustained storm damage last year, I spent $12,000 of my own hard-earned money to have it completely replaced. But within the family narrative, they treated the cabin like a public resort. They hosted 4th of July barbecues, invited their friends up for long autumn weekends, and let Mark use it as a personal dating pad. They never brought groceries. They never swept the floors. If a pipe froze or a light bulb burned out, they didn't fix it. they called me, because in their minds, I was the maintenance worker for their luxury inheritance. I was allowed to pay for it, but they owned the joy inside it. I was trapped in an elaborate prison of my own making, completely blind to the fact that they were using my deep desire for connection to fund a lifestyle they could never afford on their own. I didn't call them. I didn't send an angry text message. I didn't post a cryptic quote on social media to let them know I was hurting. My body went into a state of total, automated survival mode. I got into my car and drove across the city toward my parents' house. I don't remember the drive at all. I don't remember stopping at red lights, navigating the highway, or using my turn signals. My mind was completely trapped, playing that single social media image on a loop. My brother in his tuxedo, my mother in her blue silk, and my father raising a glass of champagne. They looked so perfectly complete, and I wasn't there. I pulled into their driveway just as dusk was settling. The house looked exactly the same as it always did. The grass was neatly manicured, the porch light cast a warm, inviting glow across the steps, and the structure itself looked like the epitome of a happy, stable home. But as I stared at the front door, a physical wave of nausea hit me. I felt like a trespasser on my own history. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned completely white, bloodless and stiff. I took a slow, ragged breath, forcing the air into my lungs. Stay calm, I told myself. You need to hear them say it. You need to hear the logic from their own mouths. I walked up the wooden steps and used my key to unlock the front door. I still had a key. For the very first time in my adult life, a dark, unsettling thought crossed my mind. I wondered if they secretly resented the fact that I had a key to this house. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar scent of roast chicken hit me. It was a Tuesday night, traditional family dinner night. Historically, I was always invited, or at least expected to show up. Tonight, my phone had remained completely silent in my pocket. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing softly, and stepped into the kitchen. They were all there, my mother, my father, and Mark. They were sitting around the heavy wooden table, eating and sharing a moment. Mark was laughing deeply at something my father had just said. But the very instant I stepped over the threshold, the laughter evaporated. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was an immediate, violent stop. The entire room went completely dead silent. Metal forks froze halfway to open mouths. My mother looked up, her eyes widening in a flash of distinct panic before her expression quickly hardened. She didn't look happy to see me. She didn't look relieved. She looked deeply annoyed, as if I were an uninvited solicitor who had rudely interrupted an exclusive executive meeting. "Lucy," my mom said, her voice completely flat, stripped of any maternal warmth, "we didn't know you were coming over." She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't stand up to pull out a chair for me. She didn't offer me a plate of food. She simply stated my presence as an inconvenient, unprompted fact. I stood perfectly still by the refrigerator, the ambient hum of the appliance vibrating against my back. I felt entirely cold. I shifted my gaze to my younger brother, Mark. The moment my eyes found his face, he looked away, suddenly becoming intensely fascinated by his pile of mashed potatoes. He couldn't even manage to look me in the eye. "I saw the photos," I said. My voice was remarkably quiet, but it didn't shake. It carried a strange, heavy stability that seemed to startle them. "I saw the photos of the wedding." The silence that followed stretched out until it felt like a physical weight crushing the air in the room. I waited. I waited for the classic defense mechanism to kick in. I waited for someone to jump out of their chair, wrap their arms around me, and say, "Oh my God, Lucy, it was a terrible mistake. The invitation must have been lost in the mail." I waited for them to show a flicker of guilt, to cry, or to offer some kind of desperate explanation. But absolutely none of that happened. My father calmly set his fork down on his plate with a dull clink. He picked up his glass, took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, and looked at me with a profoundly tired, exasperated expression, as if I were a spoiled child throwing an embarrassing tantrum over a broken toy. "It was a small ceremony, Lucy," he said, his tone dismissive and dry. Very small. There were over 100 people in those photos, Dad, I replied, my voice dropping an octave. I saw our cousins from Ohio. I saw the next-door neighbors. I saw Mark's college roommate from sophomore year. I didn't realize our entire extended social circle constituted a small, intimate gathering. It all happened very fast, sweetie, my mother chimed in, casually wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. We really didn't want to overwhelm you. You've been so incredibly busy with your big corporate job in the city. We all know how easily stressed you get with work, and we didn't want to add another thing to your plate. Stressed? I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air like a foul odor. It was my only brother's wedding. I bought a designer dress. I asked all of you about the official date 3 separate times last month, and every single time, you looked me in the face and told me a date hadn't been locked in yet. Mark finally snapped. He dropped his fork, looking fiercely defensive and angry. Look, Lucy, don't come in here and start making a massive scene. This right here is exactly why we decided to do it this way. I felt as though he had reached across the table and slapped me hard across the face. What exactly is that supposed to mean, Mark? You just bring a certain energy, Lucy, he said, waving his hand dismissively in the air, gesturing vaguely at my entire body. You're always so intense. You always have this way of making every single family event entirely about you, your timeline, or your opinions. We just wanted a simple, peaceful day. We wanted the wedding to be easy. I stared at him, my mind suddenly racing backward through the last 10 years of our lives. I thought about the winter night I drove Mark to the emergency room at 3 a.m. when he broke his leg, staying up until dawn because our parents were too exhausted to drive. I thought about the $4,500 I gave for Mom's surgery. I thought about every single birthday, holiday, and minor family crisis where I was the default fixer, the one who paid for the food, managed the logistics, and soothed everyone's fragile tempers. I make things about me? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. I have spent my entire adult life financial backing and taking care of this family. See? My mother said quickly, pointing a polished finger directly at my face. This is exactly what we mean. You're doing it right now. You're raising your voice, you're getting aggressive, and you're trying to make us all feel incredibly guilty for wanting one happy memory. It's exhausting, Lucy. We just wanted one single day, my father added, calmly cutting another piece of his chicken, completely unfazed. Just one day where we didn't have to manage your moods or walk on eggshells. And it was lovely, Lucy. It was incredibly peaceful. And then they went right back to eating. Just like that, they dismissed me from the conversation. I stood there in silence, watching them chew their food, and a terrifying, bone-chilling realization washed over me. They weren't sorry. They didn't feel a single ounce of shame or regret. They genuinely, truly believed that they were the victims of my intensity. They viewed my entire presence as a heavy burden they had to carry. I looked around the room. I had personally paid for and painted those kitchen walls 2 years ago. I bought that stainless steel refrigerator when their old one died. I paid for the very tiles they were standing on. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a utility, an appliance. I was highly valuable when something needed to be repaired or financed, but the moment it came time for joy, celebration, and love, I was completely in the way. So I'm optional, I whispered. My mother let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. Don't be so dramatic, Lucy. Grab a plate from the cupboard if you're staying, but please, I beg you, don't ruin our dinner. I didn't grab a plate. I didn't scream. I just stood there, letting the cold, hard truth sink deep into my bones. The initial white-hot pain was slowly replaced by a strange, numb, and crystalline clarity. I saw them for the first time, not as the parents and brother I desperately wished they were, but as the people they actually were, selfish, cruel, and completely incapable of loving me. I'm not staying, I said cleanly. Fine, Mark muttered without looking up. Close the door on your way out. I turned around, walked down the hall, and closed the front door quietly behind me. I didn't slam it. I walked down the steps into the cool night air, looked up at the vast sky, and realized that while the world looked exactly the same, my life had changed forever. 2 days after the incident in the kitchen, my phone began to vibrate on my desk. The caller ID lit up with Mark's name. I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart thumping against my ribs. A small, foolish, and deeply wounded part of me whispered, maybe he's calling to apologize. Maybe now that the dust has settled, he realizes how monstrous they were. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear. Hello? Hey, Lucy? Mark's voice boomed through the speaker, completely cheerful, light, and entirely normal. It sounded as though our confrontation in the kitchen had never even taken place. It sounded as though he hadn't systematically cut me out of his wedding photos. How's it going? I'm here, Mark, I said, my voice completely flat and level. What do you want? Wow, okay, chill out, he laughed. That familiar, condescending chuckle that used to make me second-guess myself. I'm just calling to check in on my big sis. And actually, I do have a favor to ask you. A pretty big one, actually. I tightened my grip on the phone until my fingers turned white. A favor? Yeah, so, Sarah and I didn't really get to plan a proper honeymoon trip because the actual wedding costs were completely insane, he said, pausing slightly, clearly waiting for me to jump in and offer to write a check to cover a flight. That was always our established pattern. Mark had a financial problem, and Lucy opened her bank account. This time I remained completely silent. Sensing that I wasn't biting, he rushed to fill the void. Anyway, we're a little bit tapped out right now, and we realized we desperately need a nice, relaxing break, just the two of us. So we thought, hey, why not use your lake house? It's just sitting up there completely empty right now, and the weather forecast says it's going to be absolutely perfect next week. Can we swing by your apartment tonight to grab the keys? My brain momentarily scrambled trying to process the absolute audacity of the request. He wasn't asking to borrow a cup of sugar. He was asking to take his new wife to my private sanctuary, the one place in the world where I went to escape the noise and heal. You want to use my lake house? I said, my voice dangerously calm. For your honeymoon? Yeah, it would be absolutely perfect, he said, his confidence unshakable. Mom and Dad said it would be completely fine, too. They told me you wouldn't mind at all. A cold chime rang in my head. Mom and Dad said it would be fine? Yeah, they said it's family property, so we should all be able to use it whenever we want. Plus, it saves us from spending a ton of cash on a hotel room. Family property. The phrase echoed through my mind like an insult. Mark, I said, leaning forward at my desk. Who exactly pays the monthly mortgage on that lake house? I don't know, he grumbled, his tone instantly shifting to irritation. You handle all the bills and stuff, right? What's your point? Who paid $12,000 for the new roof last year, Mark? Who pays the annual property taxes? Who pays the premium insurance? Who drives up there every single spring to clean out the dead leaves from the gutters and scrub the floors down? You do, Lucy? Obviously, he snapped, sounding completely impatient. We all know you're really good at that kind of logistical stuff. Look, why are you making this so incredibly difficult? We're family. What's yours is ours, right? And there it was, the absolute core of their entire generational belief system. What's yours is ours, but it never ever worked the other way around. Their happiness was exclusively theirs. Their milestones were theirs. Their wedding was theirs. But my money, my real estate, and my grueling labor belonged to the collective tribe to consume whenever they pleased. You didn't invite me to your wedding, Mark, I said, each word landing like a stone. You stood in our parents' kitchen and told me to my face that my energy was unwanted. And now, 48 hours later, you are calling me to demand a free vacation at my home. Oh my God, are you seriously still crying about that? Mark groaned loudly into the receiver. That was one single afternoon, Lucy. This is a house. It's a physical building made of wood and nails. It isn't emotional. Stop being so incredibly petty. Sarah is really looking forward to this trip. Petty, I whispered. Yes, petty punishment. That's exactly what you're doing right now. You're punishing the whole family because you got your little feelings hurt over a party. It's incredibly childish. I closed my eyes, and the entire multi-layered dynamic became blindingly clear. They didn't just lack love for me. They felt completely entitled to me. They truly believed they owned my assets, my life and my career, and that I should be profoundly grateful for the opportunity to serve them. If I said yes to him right now, nothing would ever change. They would go to my lake house, drink expensive wine on the wooden deck I paid for, sleep in the beds I meticulously made, leave their trash behind for me to clean up, and continue to treat me like an annoying nuisance the moment they returned. But I had never said no before, not like this. "I'm not being petty, Mark," I said, a wave of absolute calm washing over me. "I'm waking up." "What the hell does that even mean?" he asked, his voice dropping into a defensive growl. "It means I am going up to the lake house this weekend," I said, "and I am going completely alone. No, Mark, you cannot have the keys. You cannot use my house. Go book a hotel room." "Mom is going to be absolutely furious with you, Lucy," he threatened, his voice dropping low and venomous. "She personally promised Sarah we could use the cabin." "Then Mom can pay for your hotel room," I said cleanly, and hung up the phone. My heart was pounding like a sledgehammer against my ribs, and I felt dizzy from the sudden rush of adrenaline. I had just denied them access. I packed my things, left work early, and drove 3 hours straight out of the city toward the lake house. I didn't go to relax. I went to dig. Mark kept insisting it was family property, and my parents acted like they held the keys to the kingdom, but I remembered signing those papers a decade ago. I needed to see the proof in cold black and white ink. I arrived at the cabin just as the sun dipped below the waterline. I unlocked the front door, turned on the lights, and walked straight into the small office off the kitchen, where the old metal filing cabinet sat. I opened the squeaking drawer and began pulling out folders: mortgage statements, tax records, insurance policies. I sat down on the hardwood floor, surrounded by piles of paper, and began to read. The official property deed was dated exactly 10 years ago. The primary legal owner, Lucille Marie Patterson. There were no other names listed. Not my father's name, not my mother's. Just me. Every single mortgage statement for the past 120 months had been paid directly from my personal checking account. Every tax bill had my signature on the check. I searched frantically for the family trust documents my father had bragged about for an entire decade. "The house belongs to the trust, Lucy," he would always say during family dinners. "We all hold equal shares." I dug through every envelope, every legal scrap, every folder. There was no trust. It didn't exist. There was never a lawyer hired, never a single document filed with the state. It was an elaborate, calculated lie. A ghost story they spun for 10 years to keep me compliant, to make me feel like I was merely a temporary steward of a family legacy, rather than the actual, rightful owner of a $500,000 piece of real estate. But then, my phone buzzed with an incoming email from Uncle Victor. Attached were scanned documents he had kept from my grandfather's estate files. My jaw dropped as I read a printed email exchange from my father to my mother, dated exactly 10 years ago. Subject: the lake house problem. "Martha, Victor says our credit is too shot to qualify for the mortgage on the cabin, but I have a plan. We can put the entire thing in Lucy's name. She's got that new corporate job, and she's desperate to please us. We will tell her it's a family trust situation, so she doesn't get any ideas about actually controlling the property. We let her pay the monthly nut, and we keep the keys. It's a total win-win. We get a free vacation house, and she gets to feel important." I sat back against the desk, the paper trembling in my hand. It wasn't just poor financial planning on their part. It was a premeditated strategy. They had weaponized my love, my vulnerability, and my desire for their approval, treating me like a financial resource to be mined while actively plotting to keep me in the dark. The burning rage that settled into my chest that night wasn't loud. It was ice cold. I realized that if I confronted my parents with just my words, they would use the exact same playbook they had run for decades. They would cry, scream, call me ungrateful, and gaslight me until I second-guessed my own sanity. I didn't need a family discussion. I needed armor. I needed a team of professionals to build an unbreachable wall between my life and their exploitation. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I packed every single document from the lake house filing cabinet into a cardboard box, locked the cabin doors, and drove straight back to the city to meet with the two people my friend Chloe had recommended: Natalie Cruz, a cutthroat attorney who specialized in asset protection, and Stephen Ward, a forensic accountant who looked at human beings as rows of numbers. Sitting in Natalie's high-rise office, surrounded by polished mahogany and the quiet hum of corporate success, I laid out the deed, the mortgage records, and the devastating emails Uncle Victor had forwarded to me. Natalie put on her glasses, her eyes scanning the pages with terrifying speed. She didn't offer me tea, and she didn't offer me sympathy. She offered me strategy. "Here is the legal reality, Lucy," Natalie said, tapping her pen against the deed. "You are the sole legal owner of this property. This family trust talk is a complete ghost story. It carries zero weight in a court of law. But because you have allowed them to use the cabin freely for 10 years, you have inadvertently established a precedent of tenancy. If we want to lock them out completely, we have to do it formally. We need to issue a legal cease and desist notice for trespassing. We change the locks, we install cloud-connected security cameras, and we treat them like a liability." "A liability," I repeated, the word tasting metallic in my mouth. "Yes," Natalie said firmly. "They hid a wedding from you, while actively plotting to use your home as a honeymoon suite against your explicit will. They do not view you as a daughter. They view you as an oil well. You need to cap the well." That afternoon, I sat down with Stephen Ward. He pulled up my credit history, my bank statements, and every recurring charge linked to my name. Within 2 hours, he had mapped out the true, horrifying scale of how deeply my family had been bleeding me dry. "Lucy, look at this," Stephen said, pointing his pen at a recurring monthly fee. "You've been paying $400 a month for a climate-controlled storage unit in the suburbs. What's in it?" "My dad's old executive office furniture," I said, my voice dropping. "When they downsized their house a decade ago, he said he didn't want to part with it and asked if I could just hold it for a few months." Stephen clicked his calculator, his face forming a grim line. $400 a month for 10 years is nearly $5,000 a year. You have spent $50,000 storing old furniture your father hasn't looked at in a decade. And look at this business line of credit. 2 years ago, you co-signed a commercial loan for your brother Mark's consulting firm." "Yes," I whispered. "He told me he was handling the payments." "He isn't," Stephen said coldly. "He has missed 3 consecutive payments this year alone. It's actively dragging down your pristine credit score. And because you are the co-signer, the bank is preparing to come after your personal accounts to liquidate the debt. Lucy, you aren't a daughter to these people. You are their private bank, their safety net, and their retirement fund. And they are completely draining you." Every piece of the puzzle fell into place. They spent thousands of dollars on a lavish wedding party, buying silk dresses and premium champagne, while completely neglecting the business loan I had co-signed out of love. They were living a life of leisure funded by my silence. I looked at Stephen and Natalie, my hands perfectly still on the glass table. "Stop it," I said. "Stop all of it. Cut the cords." "It's going to get very ugly very fast," Stephen warned. "They will lose their phone services, their storage unit will go to auction, and debt collectors will start calling their house." I thought about my mother's smug face at the kitchen table, telling me how peaceful the wedding was without my energy. "Let them drown in the reality they built," I replied. "Draft the papers. I want entirely out." The explosion didn't take long to arrive. It was a crisp Tuesday morning, exactly 3 days after my legal team had dispatched the certified letters. I was sitting at my desk on the 14th floor of my corporate building, managing a project timeline, when the internal line on my desk phone rang. It was David, the head of security down in the main lobby. Miss Patterson. David's voice sounded strained, accompanied by a faint, chaotic shouting in the background. I have 3 individuals down here at the security desk, demanding to see you immediately. They claim they are your family, and they are extremely agitated. They are refusing to leave the building. My stomach did a violent flip, but I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath. They hadn't called my cell phone because I had blocked their numbers. They hadn't emailed because Natalie's legal notice had explicitly warned them against it, so they had chosen to stage a public, high-pressure ambush at my place of work. They knew how much I valued my professional reputation. They thought the sheer embarrassment of a public scene would break my resolve, causing the old, desperate to please Lucy to come running down the stairs with a checkbook just to make them stop screaming. I am not expecting any visitors, David, I said, my voice cutting through the line with absolute clarity. Please inform them that I am in an executive meeting and cannot come down to the lobby. I tried telling them that, ma'am, David replied, his voice dropping an octave as a shrill, familiar screech echoed near his microphone. But the older woman is currently shouting at the staff, claiming she is your mother and that she has a legal right to enter the building. The younger man is trying to push past the turnstiles. Do not let them up under any circumstances, David, I said firmly. If they disrupt the peace of the lobby, you have my full authorization to have them legally removed by police. I hung up the phone, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. But as I sat there in the quiet of my office, a sudden, powerful shift occurred inside me. I realized I didn't want to hide in a cubicle on the 14th floor like a frightened child. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the exact moment their unearned authority collided with a world that had actual rules and structural boundaries. I stood up, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button for the ground floor. The very moment the elevator doors slid open into the massive, marble-lined lobby, the sound of my mother's voice hit me like a physical wave. This is an absolute outrage, she was screaming, her face bright red as she slammed her designer purse onto the granite security desk. She is my daughter. You cannot keep a mother from seeing her own flesh and blood. My father was standing right behind her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, glaring at a younger security guard. Do you have any idea who I am? I am her father. I want your building manager down here this instant. Mark was pacing near the heavy glass revolving doors, his face contorted in a desperate, angry sneer. He was the first one to spot me stepping out of the elevator bank. He pointed a finger wildly across the room. There she is, there she is. My mother whipped around, her eyes locking onto me with the terrifying intensity of a predator losing its prey. She marched directly toward me, but she only made it 3 steps before she hit the heavy, waist-high glass security turnstiles. The automated barriers were locked tight. She grabbed the metal bars of the gate, shaking them with a frantic, unhinged energy. For the first time in my entire life, there was a physical, unyielding barrier standing between my family and me. They couldn't reach across the space to touch me, pull at me, or drain my energy. I walked calmly down the secure side of the pathway, stopping exactly 2 inches away from the glass gate. I stood there, silent, erect, and completely detached. The lobby had gone entirely quiet. Dozens of corporate executives, colleagues I worked with daily, and building visitors had stopped in their tracks to watch the spectacle. A year ago, I would have died of pure mortification. Today, I felt like a scientist observing an experiment. Lucy, open this goddamn gate right now, my father barked, his voice booming across the marble floor. We need to talk about what you've done. No, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden quiet of the lobby, it carried perfectly. We don't. You changed the locks on my lake house, Mark roared, his voice cracking with humiliation. Sarah and I drove up there yesterday afternoon with a trunk full of groceries for our honeymoon, and our keys didn't work. Do you have any idea how deeply embarrassing that was for my wife? It is my house, Mark, I replied, my tone clinical, and I didn't invite you. I thought my energy was far too intense for your peaceful celebrations. We are your family, Lucy, my mother wailed, her fingers clawing at the metal trim of the turnstile. How can you be so incredibly cruel after every single thing we have done for you throughout your life? What exactly have you done for me, Mom? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Besides use my name to secure a piece of real estate you couldn't afford, lie to me about a family trust for 10 years, and erase me from the family history the moment it suited your social narrative? Oh my God, are you seriously still crying about that stupid party? Mark laughed, a desperate, volatile sound. Get over yourself, Lucy. You are actively ruining everyone's life over a missed wedding invitation. This isn't about a party, Mark, I said, looking past him to look my father directly in the eyes. This is about the theft. This is about the $50,000 I spent storing furniture while you bought luxury golf clubs. This is about the business loan you are intentionally defaulting on, knowing it would destroy my credit. I am finished being your private bank. My father's face went completely pale, his chest deflating as he realized the exact depth of the financial audit I had conducted. David, the massive security guard, stepped smoothly into the space between my mother and the turnstile, his hand resting casually near his utility belt. Ma'am, sir, you are causing a severe public disturbance. You need to vacate this property immediately, or I will contact local law enforcement to have you arrested for criminal trespassing. You wouldn't dare, my mother spat, though her eyes flicked nervously to the heavy glass doors. David ignored her entirely and looked over his shoulder at me. Miss Patterson, do you want these individuals removed from the premises? The silence in the lobby returned, heavier than before. My parents stared at me through the glass barrier, their expressions shifting from anger to a sudden, terrifying panic. They were waiting for the old Lucy to cave. They expected me to look down, blush, and say, "No, it's okay, David. Let them up." They expected the girl who was desperate to buy their love to protect them from the consequences of their own actions. I looked at my mother's venomous eyes, my father's crumbling arrogance, and my brother's immense entitlement. Yes, David, I said clearly. Please have them removed. They are harassing me, and they do not belong here. My mother let out a sharp, gasping shriek of pure, unadulterated shock as David and two other uniformed guards stepped forward, firmly but safely guiding them toward the exit. You will regret this, Lucy, her voice echoed one last time as the heavy glass doors began to slide open. You will come crawling back to this family when you are entirely alone. I don't think so, I whispered to myself. I turned my back on them before they even cleared the doorway. I walked back to the elevator bank, stepped inside the empty car, and watched the metal doors slide shut, cutting off the remaining sounds of the street. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel wall. I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor who had just won her very first battle by simply refusing to play the game. The final act of their collapse wasn't a massive cinematic explosion. It was a slow, agonizing crumble. Once Stephen and Natalie systematically severed the financial cords, reality caught up with my family at a terrifying velocity. The first thing to vanish was the family cell phone plan, which I had been quietly paying for 6 consecutive years. I canceled the lines on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my administrative office line was flashing with 12 missed calls from an unlisted number. I never picked up the receiver. Next came the storage unit housing my father's old executive furniture. I stopped the automatic credit card payments and let the 30-day delinquency notice land in their mailbox. My mother left a frantic, trembling voicemail on my work system, her voice shrill with a manic panic. Lucy, how can you do this to us? The storage company is threatening to auction off your grandmother's antique mahogany dresser. Send the $500 right now. I didn't send a dime. I hit delete, watching the audio file vanish into the digital void. Then the biggest domino fell, Mark's commercial loan. Because I had formally submitted our structural audit to the bank and removed my backing from his line of credit Due to his unnotified delinquencies, the bank immediately froze his business accounts. His boutique consulting firm, which mostly seemed to consist of him taking local clients out to long, expensive lunches on my dime, completely evaporated within 6 weeks. Word trickled down through our extended family network that Mark had to fire his administrative assistant, terminate his upscale downtown office lease, and move his entire operation back into our parents' damp basement. The social fallout was even more devastating for them. Armed with the physical paper trail Uncle Victor had given me, I no longer had to engage in exhausting he said, she said arguments with extended relatives. When my Aunt Linda called me to aggressively demand why I was being so incredibly malicious to my poor aging parents, I didn't raise my voice. I simply hung up the phone and sent her a crystal clear screenshot of the 2016 email, where my father explicitly stated that I was desperate to please and could be easily tricked into paying the monthly nut of the cabin under a fake trust. The silence that followed those text messages was absolute. Within a month, the cousins from Ohio canceled their traditional Thanksgiving visit, neighbors stopped waving across the front lawn, and the carefully manufactured illusion of their perfect family life completely disintegrated. 3 weeks after the corporate lobby incident, my parents attempted one final, desperate legal maneuver. They had a local strip mall attorney send a formal letter threatening to sue me for elder abuse and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Natalie Cruz literally laughed aloud when I dropped the document onto her desk. "This is an absolute joke," Natalie said, tossing the letter into her recycling bin. "You have zero legal obligation to support fully capable adults, and we hold ironclad evidence of premeditated financial fraud. If they pursue this, we will countersue them for every single dollar spent on the storage unit, the roof, and the mortgage over the last 10 years. We will completely dismantle them in an open courtroom." Natalie drafted a single-page reply. It listed the exact cumulative amount of money I had provided them over a decade, well over $200,000, and attached a copy of my father's asset liquidation ledger. The letter ended with a terrifyingly clinical sentence. "Ms. Patterson is fully prepared to forego recovering these exploited funds in direct exchange for a permanent legal severance of all contact. If you choose to pursue any further legal action, we will seek full financial restitution." We never heard from their attorney again. They couldn't afford a legal battle, and they knew their bluff had been entirely called. A month later, a final email from my father bypassed my filter. Subject: "Let's talk. Lucy, enough is enough. We are family, and we cannot let things end in this cold, clinical way. Lawyers are expensive and entirely unnecessary. Meet your mother and me at the Riverfront Park this Saturday afternoon. Neutral ground. No shouting, just a normal conversation. Please, Lucy, do it for your mother's sake." I debated ignoring it, but Natalie advised me that a formal, witnessed closing of the circle would solidify our boundaries. I asked Uncle Victor to accompany me as a third-party witness, and he agreed without hesitation. The park was vibrant and packed with young families when we arrived on Saturday. Kids were laughing on the swings, dogs were fetching tennis balls, and the world was moving forward in beautiful, bright colors, which only made the dark reality of our meeting feel more stark. My parents were sitting alone on a wooden bench near the water. Mark wasn't there. Without my money backing his lifestyle, he was likely working a weekend shift at the local car dealership, where he had recently taken a job. They looked shockingly small. My father's proud, arrogant shoulders were visibly slumped, and my mother looked 10 years older, her hair undyed and silvering at the temples. When they saw me approach, they didn't smile. Instead, they glared at Uncle Victor with pure, unadulterated venom. "You brought a traitor to our family meeting," my father spat, his voice rough and gravelly. "I brought a witness," I replied calmly, standing directly in front of the bench. I refused to sit down next to them. "What do you want?" "We want our daughter back, Lucy." My mother wept, her voice wavering with a performative, theatrical sorrow as she reached a hand out to clutch at my coat. I smoothly took a deliberate step backward, letting her hand fall into the empty air. We made mistakes, yes. The wedding. It was an oversight. We are so incredibly sorry. You aren't sorry you did it, Mom, I said, my voice completely steady. You are just incredibly sorry you got caught, and you are sorry that the money stopped flowing. We are drowning, Lucy, my father said, his gruff demeanor cracking to reveal a desperate panic. The bills are piling up. Mark is in severe trouble with his debts. We are on the verge of losing the house entirely. I know, I said, thinking of the overgrown weeds and long grass I had seen when driving past their property the week before. So you're just going to stand there and watch your own parents sink? My father demanded, his old anger flaring up for a brief second. After everything we gave you life, Lucy. You gave me life, I agreed, looking at them both with a profound, detached pity. And then you spent the next 10 years charging me for it. You have taken quite enough. You took my confidence, you took my trust, and you took my savings. The bank is officially closed. We can fix this, sweetie, my mother pleaded, her eyes darting around the crowded park. Just unlock the lake house. Let Mark use it for a few selected weekends, and help us cover his loan. Payments for just 3 months until he gets back on his feet. We can go completely back to normal. I looked at them, and a wave of liberation washed over me. They still didn't understand. They were still bargaining, genuinely believing that the price of my love and autonomy could be negotiated down to a few loan installments. No, I said. The single word hung in the crisp autumn air, unyielding and final. There is no going back to normal. You will never step foot inside the lake house again. I am listing it on the private rental market next week, and strangers will be sleeping in those rooms, paying me for the privilege. I am not paying your phone bills. I am not paying for your storage. And if you ever attempt to contact me, show up at my corporate office, or send an email again, I will have Natalie file a formal restraining order and involve the police immediately. You chose Mark, and you chose to erase me. Now you have to live with the reality of that choice. I turned to Uncle Victor. I'm ready to leave. As we walked away across the green grass, my mother began screaming my name into the crowded park. Lucy, Lucy, come back here. A year ago, I would have sprinted back to her, terrified of the public scene, desperate to hush her and fix the problem. Today, I just kept walking. Her voice grew smaller, fainter, and more pathetic with every single step I took, until it was completely swallowed by the sound of the rushing river. 6 months have passed since that afternoon in the park, and autumn has fully settled over the lake. I am sitting on the wooden deck of my cabin right now, wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket, holding a steaming mug of hot coffee. The air is crisp, smelling intensely of pine needles and wood smoke, and the surface of the water is a perfect sheet of glass reflecting the brilliant orange and deep red leaves of the surrounding trees. For the first few months of this total isolation, the silence absolutely terrified me. I was so incredibly addicted to the chaotic adrenaline of my family's constant emergencies that the quiet felt like a vacuum in my chest. I had to go to therapy to relearn exactly who I was when I wasn't playing the role of the default provider and fixer. But today, looking out over the water, I smile. I painted the front door of the cabin a bright, triumphant red. I threw out the old furniture my mother had selected and completely remodeled Mark's old bedroom into a private library for myself. The property is currently paying for itself through selective vacation rentals, transforming from an emotional drain into a powerful financial asset. There is a final twist to this story, but it isn't a loud or dramatic reveal. The twist is that for my entire adult life, I truly believed that losing my family would completely destroy me. I thought that being cut out and left entirely alone would break my spirit beyond repair. But it didn't. Cutting them out of my life wasn't a tragedy. It was the clinical amputation of a gangrenous limb. It left a scar, yes, but it saved my life. I am 34 years old. I own my home, I own my career, and most importantly, I own my story. I look down at my phone sitting on the wooden table. It is completely silent. No missed calls, no toxic text messages, no demands. I breathe the cold, clean mountain air deep into my lungs. This is exactly what peace feels like. And for the very first time in my life, I didn't have to write a check to buy it. It is simply entirely mine.